You know, it's like, why is it not xenus or whatever in English? And like, that's probably why I didn't know about more tier 3 and 4 for the longest fucking time. Because they have these totally generic sounding names in English. And I'm like, well, no wonder I didn't know about it, you know? What was that? Oh, God, dude, there's so many budget FPS from back in the day that, you know, there's tons of them I played. A lot of them I, still haven't played, but I've been aware of. But sometimes I forget about and get reminded of, or, I go reread the abandonware sites, or somebody makes a video and I'm like, oh, yeah, that game. But there's tons of games that I wanted to play so fucking bad that I never got around to back in the day. It was like, what was that one? It's like Spetsnaz. Or there's one called Strike Terror or Terror Strike or some shit like that. You know what's funny about a lot of these games? And I did a little bit of research, and yeah, apparently they actually are on different engines, like URMT and I don't know, more tier 1 or 2, and some of the other ones. But they look so similar. But one of the things that it really reminds me of, the way that Stalin Subway and different games like that I mentioned play, kind of reminds me of like some of the, free mods for Unreal Tournament 2004 back in the day. Just the overall movement and just the way the gameplay feels or like looks if you're watching it on a video or whatever. They remind me a ton of, I don't know if anybody's ever played like Frag Ops or SAS Into the Lion's Den, or like these other kind of pseudo realistic, kind of like pseudo Milsim type of first person shooter mods from back in the day. I don't know. There's just something magical about this stuff. And, I really love not just to see the astonishing capabilities of, talented, intelligent, creative programmers and designers or whatever, but just the fact of how it's such a labor of love. And it's like, if anything, the, graphical or whatever glitches are part of the charm, right? Sort of like with Painkiller, I mentioned, what if the fact that it fucks up if you do the hex edit is part of why it's such a good engine, right? Like, what if all the weird glitches in Boiling Point are like those are a direct result of it, being such an accomplishment of an engine by the guys that made it, right? It's like they're inextricable. You can't have one without the other. But that's the cool thing about games like that, and that's why I like, nowadays they call it jank or whatever. But a lot of these games back in the day, they were released on the Western market, English speaking American market, whatever, with different names and this and that, maybe to try to hide it or make it more marketable or whatever. But they would be on publishers that were basically budget games, or shovelware or whatever you want to call it. So that's why I used to call it budget FPS. But that's why it's always appealed to me so much. Like CTU Marine Sharpshooter and all these other games you could get for like 10, $20 back in the day. Was that, okay, I mean, they might have glitches, they might, be weird, and maybe there's some bad design choices here and there, this or that. But you can feel the soul that got put into it. And that's what matters for me, right? I mean, fuck, nowadays, it's like if you were going to, you know, get some shitty room for rent or whatever, if it was a piece of shit rundown place, they would say that it had that lived in feel or whatever, right? To the degree we're deleterious, they would try to make it a marketing point. But this is like a valid example of shit. It's like, those aren't flaws, those are the uniqueness, right? And I don't know. I've been fucking with this stuff for over 20 years before there was even terms for it, at least that I was aware of. And yeah, I wish I could play Boiling Point for the first time again. I'm going to try to get a download going of some kind, but if I could guarantee it would go to the original developers on GOG, I'll buy it full price. Otherwise, I might wait till it's 80% off or whatever. But then, yeah, I might end up having to buy it, or just buy it just to, for sure, legit have it. But yeah, I really want to play that game again. There was always this weird sort of obfuscation of like, you know, post-Soviet, this, that, whatever the fuck you want to call it, media in the United States. And yeah, I'm sure there's historical reasons for that. But everything, or most of the, I wouldn't say everything, most of the stuff that appeals to me with games and music tend to come from that area, right? I mean, it comes from all over the place, but it's like with grindcore, like Czech Republic and like Poland, it's like they made the music for me specifically, right? Or like a lot of these, so-called slavjank games or like budget games or whatever. It's like they were made purpose built to appeal to me. And of course, I know that they weren't, but I don't know. I think a big part of it is I have the technical mind, or like awareness or whatever, to see what goes into games and see what that they were doing, what they tried to do, what they actually accomplished, and just the effort put into it is a big part of the appeal to me. And I would rather take a game that's got bugs or aren't that polished and something that is, but it's got a soul to it, right? Like that's the problem with Stalker 2. I didn't, when it finally released, I didn't even know about it. It was so unremarkable that I hadn't even heard of it. For several months, actually, I'd made a couple years ago, I made videos about it, not realizing it was actually already out. But with Stalker 2, you can see the difference between Shadow Chernobyl, right? And it's sort of like with Boiling Point. Shadow Chernobyl, it had bugs, but yeah, there was crashing and B-sod type of shit. But a lot of the bugs were charming, right? They added uniqueness or a soul to the game or whatever, right? Everybody's familiar with like, oh, get out of here, Stalker, and all that shit. But it's those little things that add the charm that, at least for me, make the game appealing. Like with Boiling Point, Stalker, Shadow Chernobyl, it was buggy, but it's because you had developers that were passionate about what they were doing, doing the best that they could do, and creating what I consider a phenomenal result. And it's like the bugs and all that. It's like I love the game because of it, not in spite of it, right? But what was cool about Boiling Point is that even though I didn't hear about it till 2005, what I mentioned with the graphics technology, the idea that it could have came out a couple years before it did is even crazier. Because then it would have beat even Far Cry 1 to the market. But I seen somebody talking about they had followed its development for several years. Well, I didn't hear about it till it got released in the U.S. because I saw it, you know, at the store for $20 or whatever. And I was like, hey, that looks cool. But I had followed Stalker development for years, probably since maybe 2002, back when it was still Stalker Oblivion Lost. And there was a ton of stuff in that was going to be in the game that eventually got cut for Shadow Chernobyl that I was kind of upset about, or disappointed or whatever. I wouldn't not necessarily say disappointed, but stuff that I thought was like going to be so awesome about Stalker that actually, was in Boiling Point. And one of the things that I used to think would have been awesome with Shadow of Chernobyl was what actually was in Boiling Point, where when you drive around, you don't just get in a car and just drive forever like Grand Theft Auto. You actually have to go to petrol pumps and like actually refuel. That was something that was supposed to be in Shadow of Chernobyl. And, actually, if you look at Shadow of Chernobyl's maps, a lot of them are kind of goofy, the layouts. But if you had seen the old X-ray builds from back in the day before release, it would all make sense. Because the maps used to be fucking way bigger. And they were essentially designed for vehicles. So, like, for an example, the petrol pumps at Dark Valley in the final game, yeah, that's why those are there. And, if you, like, I played the X-ray builds of Stalker back in the day when it was, like, technically piracy or whatever to have them. I mean, eventually GSC, like, officially released them. I mean, they did that, right? But yeah, I played the old builds back in the day, numbers. I don't, the only one I really remember in my head is 1945, I think it was. But a lot of those older builds, they had the vehicles in it, and it was pretty cool to be able to drive around, you know, refuel, and the idea that it wasn't just going to last forever was kind of part of the spooky factor. And that was sort of part of the, what was the part that was cut from the game, but like they re-added, and I don't know, I think they put in an anomaly or some other mods. But there's this one part that was supposed to be between Dark Valley and Sidorovich, or fucking Corden, in the final game. But in the final game, you go through that gate from Dark Valley. Now you're, or no, actually you can't go through that gate in Vanilla. Well, you get what I'm saying though. You used to have that long, you know, road thing in the mountains or whatever, and it also had a fuel station thing. And used to, you would have had to drive through it, and